Thank you very much. Good afternoon to the Mayor and the Ministers and to the Stock Exchange. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here with you on this rather exciting occasion. Just, 8 days ahead of the European Football Championships. And of course, in many ways, despite what we just heard, against such a troubled background of the European economy, a celebration of how well Poland is doing. It is, as somebody who is not that exposed in a regular basis to the exciting things going on here in Poland and the broader region, it really is something which is quite exciting in view of the chaos that is going on in the rest of Europe. And so ahead of the panel discussion we are going to have about opportunities, I wanted to share with you really my perspectives of how Poland and the CEE sort of exist in this very complex but exciting world. So I'm going to show you a few pictures. It won't take much more than about 15 minutes or so, hopefully, and then I can pass you on to the panel. So let me start with this picture, and I should apologize to the translators who I have not had a chance to speak to directly. I am only going to be using, you'll be pleased to know, I hope, a few of the pictures that you have, and to complicate matters, I will be going in a different order than that you have. So it will be a challenge for those of you that are following the translators, and I hope I don't confuse you all. To understand the modern world in which we find ourselves, let me first show you this picture. I hope you can see it reasonably clearly at the back. Yes? No? I don't get any response. There's a lady nodding her head there, so yes. So in my opinion, the four BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, India and China, of course, and four other large populated economies are now so important to the world economy they should not be treated as traditional emerging markets. And for the past, nearly 18 months, I have been trying to refer to them as growth economies or growth markets, and through our relationship with clients and investors all over the world, we are trying to, let's say, educate people to think of the same. If you look in that right-hand blue pie chart, that's where you'll see the share of those countries' contribution to global GDP, and as you can see on the left-hand chart, collectively, they are 25% of the world economy, about the same size as the United States. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, to think of them as traditional emerging economies, especially at the time of what's going on in the developed world, Europe in particular, is really increasingly inappropriate. In the middle, you'll see a list called the Next 11. They are the 11 largest populated countries after the four BRIC countries. And those 15 countries are the largest populated nations in the world outside of the developed world. Poland, interestingly enough, sits just outside both the Next 11, as you'll see in a second, and my definition of growth economies. The smallest populated country of the Next 11 is South Korea, in around 50 million people, and of course Poland just below 40. And of course, despite that, and as we've just heard, Poland has had a pretty successful number of years, and it's not far off qualifying for what we regard as a growth economy, which is to be at least 1% of global GDP. You will see, in fact, as you can do now, if I turn to my second of the 10 pictures I'm going to show you, here on page 3 for the benefit of, I think it's page 3, sorry, no, it's page 5 for the benefit of the, I won't bother trying to repeat the page numbers again because my eyesight can't keep up, but just to remind the translators that I'm jumping around. But here you can see the change in the contribution to global GDP in the decade which finished over 18 months ago. And you can see one of the reasons, hopefully now so clearly, why I believe those 8 countries shouldn't be regarded as traditional emerging markets. In that decade, the 8 growth economies actually contributed more to global GDP than the G7, with China itself actually contributing slightly more than the US. In the context of this particular exciting event, please look at the 2 yellow parts, because here you can see that actually the CEE collectively, if investors could genuinely think of it as a group, has had over that decade a similar influence to world GDP as somewhere where people do talk about all the time, India, and considerably more than impact many developed economies. Poland on itself, you can see, sits behind just some of the more rather popular discussed emerging economies, reflective of what we've just heard. And I'm going to come back to parts of this in a second. Over the long term, which is what equity investors should be, of course, ultimately determined to focus on, economic growth, which presumably is the main driver of any company's earnings, is driven by 2 basic factors. The number of people that work, which is driven by the size of the population by and large, and their productivity. And this picture, and the next couple I'm going to show you, and here I'm bringing it into the context of the European crisis, really relates to how we think about productivity. For many, many years, we have maintained an index called a growth environment score, and that's what you can see here. It is an index that goes from 0 to 10 in the context of the European Championships. 10 is the best, 10 is Spain, and 0 is probably close to England. And so you want to be close to 10. And here you can see the growth environment scores for the 4 BRIC countries, all the next 11, and I've also added Poland. And this is an index that consists of 18 different variables that are relevant for sustainable growth and productivity. And already, I think by just a casual glance, if you can see to the left the Polish number just below 6, it's actually higher than each of the 4 BRIC countries. And it's higher than all the next 11 countries bar South Korea. South Korea, by the way, at 7.7 has a GES score which is the 4th out of 180 countries in the world in which we do that for, above any G7 country, which is another reason why people shouldn't certainly think of that place as a traditional emerging economy. That is what many of us should aspire towards. But this goes to underscore the relative strength that somewhere like a Poland does have compared to these larger populated economies. And if Poland had more people along the lines of these other nations, then it would be quite easy against this background, in my judgment, for Poland to be a lot bigger than otherwise would be the case. Here is just a picture I'm going to show you very quickly. It's the table showing you for all the growth economies as I define them, all the different 18 different variables that we believe are relevant for productivity and sustainable growth. And more importantly, here is one showing them for all the major or 12 of the most well-focused CEE economies. And very interestingly, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, in the context of the panel discussion that's coming up, actually the average of these 12 countries is better than the troubled countries in the Club Med. And reflecting on the question that's being put to the following panel, is there an opportunity to come from this crisis? It would seem to me maybe. Because one of the things that is becoming, if not already having become clear, certainly becoming clear, is that the deeper dilemma facing EMU is that probably too many countries with very differential productivity performances joined the European Monetary Union, and they probably shouldn't. And in that context, I find myself easily attracted to the notion that a number of the CEE countries would be more natural and more stable participants. And of course, as we now realise, for very good reasons, many of these countries in this region chose to not rush to joining the European Monetary Union.